Порте, влязохте.
Аз, да. Гледах предварителното паснитко. И днес продължаваме с нашите стримове на Майнкрафт. Сега като зареди ще ви покажем какво сме направили. Така. Първо, това е за замък. Опа!
Първо, ко направи ми така?
Я такова и това. Служи ръчка тук.
А камо с толкова кръгле?
Работи ли сега?
Да,
Така.
ще малко.
Първо да покажем какво сме направили по замъкът. Добре, интересно, защото тук е скварцано, както и да.
Камо с толкова кръгле?
Така. Сега тук отгоре.
Все камо с толкова кръгле и ти така.
Сега идваме на сам. Аре бе. Така, тук. Скачаме на...
Так, виждаш ли ме?
Да. Не. Така.
Аз тебе да.
Тук сме. Това е едната. Така сме направили стаите. Опа, забравих да затворя вратата.
Сега виждаш ли ме?
Да, малко час.
Сега?
Да. Оф. Аре.
Не се виждаш.
А! Така. Тук са стаите, глупости, тява баба. Ще затворим, защото има чудовища. И... Така. Така. И така.
Аре! Ми так!
Какво стана, бе?
Изключи горната ръчка. Изключи долната! Изключи ли?
Да.
Как? Вече си изключил. Сега тако. What? Ми так.
Габриеле, какво правиш, бе?
What? Правиш?
Я ми копни меча си.
Пак ли го нямаш, бе? Толкова ли си зле, бе?
Чакай сега, че трябва да довършвам пътя. Тук не съм. Чакай, вие сте стримвам? Да, стримвам. Чакай, само променя малко името на това.
Завиш меча и лъка, бе.
Само меч ми копни.
Късно е. Айде, какво ще правим?
Ами не знам, аз ще довърша пътя, защото...
Ела да направим някаква хубава къща, бе, или да довършим тая.
Нали направихме тая?
Коя?
Българската.
Абе, то е една българска...
Добре, не те ли кефи тая?
Не.
Що?
Защото от тоня клип повече ма кефи.
Да, повече радва, за мене. Поне.
Не.
Радва повече.
Тебе, ма не и мен.
Защото е по-голямо.
Карма.
Чакай, сложи една врата, обаче.
What? Я вим сам много кое ми пише. Баси, че ми пишат.
Чакай сега да... Само да направим вече. Тока, този път ще продължи от тук.
Как е?
Какво става?
Деница...
Какво с нея?
За или с нея? Аз май чух по-така.
Кажи да гледа стрима. Кажи да гледа стрима.
Тя не знам дали изобщо... Не знам дали изобщо знае, че имаш канал.
Би трябвало.
Какво би трябвало?
Да знае, ако не е прати линк в канал. Бах ти якото.
Чай да видя, какво профи беше, как се пише в YouTube?
Gaming Pro.
А,
Да ти пратя ли линк?
да.
Изчакай малко само.
20 абоната, 4 клипа или 1522 абоната, 35 видеоклипа.
Нито едното. Искаше ми се да е едното, ама не. Сега само да довърша пътя тук.
Айде, давай, пращай.
Аз го довърших, май. Чакай малко.
Пращай.
Тук трябва да правя само.
Пращай, бе, майна.
Сега.
Ей, сега, ама знам, че още не е сега.
Готово. Направих в тази част към на път.
Ай,
Ние сме направили навсякъде с пътове. Как да си влезе, де? Ще трябва да променя името и на стрима. Моят канал. Така, Майнкрафт. Да, то става Майнкрафт стрим. Копия. Направо на стрима ли или на самия канал?
на стрима, айде.
Да, то става Майнкрафт стрим.
Тока в скайпа.
Може да се оставяте коментари, да харесвате, да шарвате, каквото искате правете. Чакай сега ви, ще пратя линк. Постави.
Ако може по-бързо.
Готово. Аз вършам в Майнкрафта. Така, тук сме направили контрол. Само към... Ето тук да направим къща. Към къщата за селяните.
Колка, майна. Не так, къде си?
Правя път
На къде?
от фермата на селяните. Съединявам го просто.
Да, гледам.
Тук ще трябва през водата малко да се мине там, какво да правим.
Да ти помогна?
Не. О. Свис. Габи, защо винаги като почне нещо отидваш при мен и ми взимаш работата от ръцете?
Помагам ти, бе. Трябва само като да рамени.
За къде се слагаш като да рамени, бе?
За стъпала, кълдърмени стъпала. За растилцива с това.
Ами то има много, на много места да слагаш, да ти кажа честно.
И колкото е. Аз на картина.
Така, сега ви покажем нашата дървена къщичка по български.
Не баш.
Баш. Стие. Така, тук влизам. Така, чакай да взема да поправя малко.
Още тук стъпала. Тя вижда ли се отива?
Къде?
Виж стъпалата, две се отиват.
Ма къде си ги сложил?
Еми, където има на квадратче по-нагоре или по-надолу.
Да. Ама тук трябва към фермерите не си сложил.
Фермери.
Така време
Или
малко.
селени иска да кажеш.
Ай, се той, селени фермери, се в гъс.
Ми так спри да бъдеш толкова превързен и спри да говориш глупости на стрима си.
Така, на стрима ни. Все пак това не е общ канал. Защото повече само клипове общи качваме, така че.
Ще да копна това.
Така тук малко да обзаведем. С малко факлички. Така тук такова. Тук махам. Тук такова, тук такова, тук такова.
И так трябва да направим някакво място, дето да се качваме и да летим с елитри. Или ти, ако искаш да летиш.
Не. Ти мога да скачаш от замък, отгоре. Или от къщата. Или от голямата къща.
Май, че замъка е по-голям. О, не, всъщност, това е по-голям. Къщата. Чай се отим. Що е затворената врата? Кой е затворил врата? Да, фак някой. Майче съм аз. Не знам.
Ами...
Да, къщата е по-голяма с един блок.
Да.
Два. Да, не, с един.
С един.
И... това да е от научести.
Това е с два, къде си на него.
Аз трябва да направя форезер, екипа не ми се прави.
Сега.
Не, тъмън.
Какво ще направим сега? Какво направим сега? Направихме пътищата към нещата.
Кои неща?
Към къщите, към замъка, към всичко, навсякъде сме направили.
Да, знам. Утре моля ти кажи, че ще дойдеш. Дали може да станеш толкова рано?
Бе, аз ще стана, а другия въпрос е дали сме на село или не сме.
Ми питай баща.
По-скоро ще сме.
Не. Защо е? Много се лъж с мене. Аре, ела, брат.
Ако съм в племе, ще дойда.
Кажи на баща, че ще върши на моето състезание.
Да бе. Тя все едно да каже, ама аз не ми се върнасел някакво правя там. Аз искам да видя и баба ми.
И кой да видиш?
Баба ми.
О. Ами аз пък искам да дойдеш на състезанието ми. Кое искаш да видиш повече?
Баба ми, защото не съм я виждал доста време.
И колко време?
2-3 месеца.
Аз не бех виждал площада от 6 месеца пъти. А пък баща ми от 1-2 месеца. На майко, баси замъка, че.
Ама теб те виждам всеки ден.
Някой път не всеки ден.
Ма в повечето случаи почти всеки ден. Сега. Окей, тук има някаква...
Не, брат, утре.
То скелет май изчезна. Знаеш ли?
Да,
Няма го.
не знам. Виждам те. Ти мене виждаш ли ма?
Не.
Я погледни нагоре.
Къде
Виждаш?
си ги?
Виждаш ли ме? Гледай нагоре.
Колко нагоре е?
Съвсем малко, аз стига.
А. Габи? I believe I can fly.
Какво пише тук? Хелуин. А пък после на вратата, какво пише ми така?
Турк стая.
Не, стая за турк.
Ех, майка
What?
ти
Кой
дей,
пише?
букватеро.
Fuck are you, bitch?
И е с пион.
Какво?
И е с пион.
А. Ми така, добре в някой друг съвър. Виж
Какво?
кетче съм. Виж кетче съм на пилон. О, дай. Виж кетче на пилона. Вчера вия стрима. Стана стрим.
Така, сега. Време е да правим... Кажи какво правим сега, Габи?
Не знам.
На
Аз
работи.
ще.
Ами, мисля да вземем да поработим по тази подземната мина. Да поразширим малко нещата.
Подземна мина.
Ми гледам, че тук си почна да копаеш надолу.
Къде е?
В подземната стая.
Това не е мина, човек. А ти, верно ли си почна да купаш?
Не, ти си почна да копаш, го е.
Ама не ти сега почна.
Не беше изкопано.
Това беше по принцип моята стая. Знам, нали, мама идва. Мама идва, нали? Ми кой? А. Баскат моята стая.
Оп.
Правиш, бе? Ами така са толкова малко е. Дай на survival.
Що?
На survival, защото е по-яко. Аз съм готов.
Ми, ще изчакаш малко. Да.
Аре, мой да го поправиш, бе.
Да си взема нещата малко. Чакай.
Искаш ли така, Кирка? Виж колко бързо чупи.
Я дай.
Трябва да... Ела с мене.
Копния!
Ама аз съм на survival.
Просто е такова и превърни се копния и пак се превърни.
Сега до. Няма да е бавно. Баб, що си махнал крафтинг тейбъла?
Не съм го махнал.
Пак? Пак ли я, бе? Не. Си тъп педал.
Така, две факли. Два.
Сейва. Тук ли беше? Тук беше. What? Така ми са. Бързо. Къде си? Тук си. Ето, дръж бе.
Нагрузка за пълнията на
Така че.
Трябваше надолу, ако питаш мен. Сега сме на 31-во, дай надолу.
Така.
Така. Намерих айран.
Чакай!
Чакам те мен. Само чакай! Абе, ти от друга страна, бе!
Ти ще изкопа с колко време... Брат, трябва да те настигам. Изчакай, ме.
Добре, чакам.
Сило ти си го изкопал това 5 века.
Виждаш ли ме?
Все още не
Даже
съм стигнал до
тебе не
тебе.
те виждам. Даже аз тебе не те виждам. Виждаш ли ме?
Не.
Знаеш какво съм направил?
Твъркваш?
Не.
Ебеш?
Не.
Беше базик?
Добре, ма знаеш какво правим?
Не те виждам. Къде си, бе, брат?
Нямаме. Фак.
Разкрихте, а?
Не. Бързо ли чупя? Знаеш как ги правя?
Не знам, аз ще дох надолу вече.
Ма не ли аз стриим с създание?
Габи? Пропаднах се едно блокче надолу.
Браво. Има редстон. Дай до тук трябва да правим стая, да разширявам.
Чакай малко. Така.
Пак ли стрим?
Не. Пуснали сме стрим. Не правим стрим. В смисъл?
Смисъл, правим стрим.
Да. Това е много бързо чупяне.
Не те го...
Намерих ресто.
Да, защото има възстановяване. И начупливост и ефективност. Какво си намерил?
Ресто.
И аз намерих вече редстон.
И дай мани.
Да,
Не, баба се.
бе.
Де да беше?
Дай само... ай само на такова да караме, на survival.
Не, тъпо е.
Аре,
Застроението е по-гадно. Застроеното е по-гадно.
като такова, ако ще строим, ще си включим на survival.
На survival.
На критив.
Аз му викам на застроението му е по-гадно. Той ми вика, застрои креатив.
Абе, на критив, бе. Знаеш какво имах предвид.
Мака ти стара.
Чули само застроение, ще се включим на критив. Още малко ще кажа,
Трябва да се научиш там.
научи ли ще?
Но залата е.
8 и 20, трябва да стана 6.
Виши.
Защото 2 часа дока мина ядене в времето, нали.
Да,
2 часа преди тук, преди тренировка.
там ще трябва да си дам...
Не, знаеш какво съм измислил?
Какво?
Ще си пусна химна на България и на аларма и ще стана на него. Защото няма човек, който да не стане на химна на България.
Сестра ти няма да стане на химна на България, сигурен съм.
Да.
Да, бе. Ти няма да станеш.
Да, вярно ми, така съм го казал.
Да.
Той няма стане.
Той... Аз днеска алармата в май веднага. Измисли зъбите ли?
Бе, да, бе, и аз па си викам.
Има корни, там си виждам.
Бе, да.
Да. Аз ще да си И така ли?
Мамо, верно ли? Не.
Така ли, само да е.
Трябва ми лопата. Аз нямам.
Аз имам.
Нямаме тай.
Трябва да ти я дам, бе, брат.
Дай.
Имам само една.
Дай ми я.
Трябва ми! Копая пръст.
Дай ми на мене.
Превърни се и си вземи.
Не. Защото ти е добре. Здравей.
Намерих желязо.
Трябва ми дърво. Не.
Дърво.
Дръво.
Трябва ни коровонита. Че тя само с поглед копае.
Не бе.
Не, знаеш, че не е всеки я копал. Свана смисъла, нали?
Фак, имам само едно дърво. Фак. Откъде бе той някакви? Има да видим.
Направих стая. Та. Той ти си направил.
Отдавна.
Аз вече почвам да копая навътре.
Аз пък вече отивам да копам с дърво. Дърво.
Ресто намерих.
Аз намерих дърво. Как ще спите от 11? Не ще идвате, бе?
Тя не да спи до 11-12 часа.
Ще идвате да снимате.
За какво да снимаме?
Защото някой да снима.
Ти за какво си там на това състезание, да габи, нали да снимаш?
Не, да тичам съм там.
Не, да снимаш. Ти не можеш да тичаш.
Ти не можеш.
Бавка. Малко да се поебавам с тебе.
Давай.
Стрим става много скучен.
Аз нали трябваше да си направя лопата, бе? Опа, не там. Това не е там. Всъщност и папата. Имам един полшън с такова. С бързина. Ого, това е моята стая. Ихи. Много бързо чупи този града. Това няма смисъл.
Оу! Оп!
Ко бе?
Лава.
Пред тебе има ли някаква пещера? Има ли някаква пещера?
Май
Да
да.
да или не?
Да, пълна е, обаче с лава.
Идвам, че пещерите... Фак паяк. Къде е тази пещера? Ти къде си?
Ще виж. Един тунел, дълъг, колкото ти искаш дълъг.
Да, виждам. Ето. Ого. Колко сакаш.
Тук има лазолит обаче, как ще го вземем?
Внимай, не го вземем. Чакай. И е лазорит.
Айде ти го вземи. Макар че аз открих тази пещера.
Ето не е баш пещера, ама... Дай го! Аре, ого, той е достичка. После ще го дам. Държиш ли?
Аз заминах нататък вече, бе, Габи.
Дръж.
Не, тук е в лавата, ела насам. Ела де! Ето много е, 41.
Айрон. И редстон. Стана. Нещо направи ли? Аз мисля, че нещо стана. Се мерят даймони.
На мен ми тъпля до Майнкрафт, така че мисля да се
Не.
кача
Вече
нагоре
влизам.
и да спирам с този Майнкрафт за сега, за този стрим и да пробвам да си инсталирам Call of Duty-то, тук стримвам. Мисля да не спирам на стрима, ще го инсталирам и да цъкам. Ако искаш, може ти да си го инсталираш и ти да цъкаш. Трябва да видим някой Call of Duty, където е
Има
мултиплеер.
памет.
Ще видим някой Call of Duty, където е мултиплеер и да цъкаме двамата.
О, ми ще ми стане някой Call of Duty, като съм с 32 бита.
Да. Но повечето са за 32 бита.
Ох, не ми сега
А как
вече.
си направил с червенокамени факли? Хитро.
Какво?
За тея драконите стана въпрос. Че ще отварят устата.
Да. Ти излезе ли от това?
Не, ще оставя нещата първо.
Аз излезох.
И сега...
Ще в един нощ повторението.
Ама гледай да не се чува много, защото аз ще продължа с стрима. Аз няма да спирам стрима.
Добре.
Сега. След като сме направили...
Стерин.
Майка ти дейба.
Тихо.
Още ще го добраме. Сак да влезе вътре. Става камада. Към недър. Недър става камада. Сега. Оп. Нашата къща. Така. Ехе. Тук имаме така. Там. Така. И така. Имам тези неща. Там трябва да сложим и факт. И излизам. Така. Спирам сървъра. Така, след като спрях сървъра, влизам в Замунда. Не в Фейсбук, а и във Фейсбук. Само нещо.
Майко, утре не знам какво стана.
Така. Сега. Влизам в Замунда. Каталози. Ето първи път на стрим ще ви покажа как да си стеглите гигара и да си инсталирате. Така, тук правим паст. Опа. Така, я да ще намерим и ето я. Така. Така, изглежда, че ще ми тръгне. Така се е фунил. Сега кажа снимки, каза да инсталира, като тази тя голяма, 32, 40, 34 гигабайта. Това е тази игра на Call of Duty. Кажа малко снимки от играта.
Warning, do not enter this game if you're under 18 years old.
This day have set upon a mighty endeavor. Souls will be shaken with the violences of war in this hour of great sacrifice. We shall prevail.
Get your head down and keep moving!
We are all that separates the world from darkness. The enemy is ruthless. We cannot, we must not fail.
Duty first. Hey, Perez! Bumpy enough for you?
We executed the mission. Get me the fuck out of here!
How many?
We had orders!
Get to cover!
Lieutenant, tell them what we're all about.
No mission too difficult. No sacrifice too great.
Welcome to the Bloody First. You're a long way from Texas, farm boy.
Pre-order now and get access to the private beta.
то ще стане бавно. Така, като понеже става бавно, мисля стрима да го ставим за другия път. На тази версия на Call of Duty. Аз сега ще се опитам да намеря някоя друга, на която да стримам по дома. Така, сега копираме играта Call of Duty. Това копираме. Копираме. Готово. Игни, какво ще ни лезе. Аз търси. Така. Не го прекъпвате. Call of Duty товар. Call of Duty 4, Call of Duty 2, Call of Duty. Това може да видиш. Надявам тази игра ще играем. Чакайте да почнем и скоро да гледаме. Тази това не е нещо. Няма да гледаме интро към тази игра. Тази така, Black Ops 3, тази ме кефи. Шанс да видим тази нещо. Кеф 6 така зареждаме.
So get your ideas, stack your hammer, but don't come unless you come to battle. Now I'll jump in the saddle. It ain't over till I say it's over. Enough when I say enough. Throw me to the wolves and close the gate up. I'm afraid of what'll happen to them wolves. When the thought of being thrown into an alligator pit, I salivated it.
Otra vez. Queda bien todo el tiempo cosa. Para ver que no hay tiempo de noche, no hay que ще играта, който ще тегне. Тази. Ще сваляме тази. През това време ще ви пусна Call of Duty. Benchmark. United Dolphins. Ето малко бенчмарк на играта.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Reviews Redux, where I take another look at some of my really old reviews and bringing them up to my more current quality standards. Today we're taking a look at Call of Duty and Call of Duty United Offensive. Both of these were released on PC and Mac, although the original Call of Duty was later re-released as Call of Duty Classic on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. All of what you're seeing is of course the PC version. This is a first-person shooter developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision, originally in October of 2003 for PC, and it later saw a release on Mac in 2004, with the expansion pack United Offensive coming out in September of 2004, although that one was developed by Grey Matter Interactive. And it's interesting to note that Infinity Ward was actually founded by a lot of members of the Medal of Honor Allied Assault development team, and yet they actually took it in a wildly different direction from Medal of Honor. And it should be noted that by the time this game came out, World War II shooters were a dime a dozen. They were friggin' everywhere thanks to the success of series like Medal of Honor. Of course, it wasn't just shooters that were problematic with regards to the World War II setting. Strategy games were plagued by it as well. And what you ended up with is just this oversaturation of World War II games, where we were playing through the exact same thing over and over and over again, with some very, very slight tweaks between the various games. Enter Call of Duty, a game that actually did something wildly different for a change. The entire premise of Call of Duty is no one fights alone. And this is something that pretty much got forgotten when you get to the later parts of the series. But back in 2003, this was actually a very novel concept, and more importantly, in Call of Duty, it was executed to a masterful degree. What I am about to tell you is no exaggeration, and it should set the tone for the rest of this review. Despite its problems, which it does have problems, the original Call of Duty, especially when you combine it with United Offensive, is the finest World War II shooter I have ever played. And I have played a lot of World War II shooters. I know it's actually rather hard for modern gamers who are used to the Call of Duty series basically just being an assembly line production that comes out every year and gets increasingly less interesting every year. But you have to understand that at one point the Call of Duty series was extremely highly respected for being innovative. When this game came out, it had every other World War II series trying to play catch-up, and they all failed miserably at it. But to understand why they did that, you have to first understand what Call of Duty is, and of course what United Offensive is. So let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out exactly why I feel it is the absolute finest World War II shooter I have ever played. Now obviously the presentation is considerably dated by modern standards. I mean, the game was released in 2003. It's to be expected that it would have aged pretty considerably, and especially considering that it's running on the Quake 3 engine. That said, it still holds up surprisingly well, and that's because the art direction and the actual quality of the visuals was very, very high in its day. For its time, the texture quality and the modeling quality were both phenomenal, and they still hold up surprisingly well despite the textures being relatively low res. And the animations are extremely smooth and fluid, except on the third-person animations, which can be a bit janky sometimes, but it's really more from a speed issue than the actual quality of the animations issue. Some of the animations are just a bit too fast for what they're trying to achieve with them. For example, some of the melee attack animations in third person are a bit too fast, and so they end up looking a bit janky. But then you have things like the first-person animations, which are pretty fantastic, so they kind of balance out. And then there's the environments themselves, which are surprisingly packed with detail for 2003, and yet the game still ran buttery smooth when it came out. And while there are a few clipping issues here and there, they're really the main extent of the graphical issues. Everything else is just a matter of it came out in 2003, therefore it's a bit dated by modern standards. Then you move over into sound design, and that's where things get a bit messier, because the actual weapon sounds range from actually fairly good to fairly wimpy. This is something that pretty much the entire series would struggle with, but there are some weapons that sound better than others, and others sound downright pathetic or don't even sound like real guns. Explosions are alright, but they don't really have a great concussive force to them, and then you move over to the music, which is very typical World War II fare. It's a sweeping orchestral soundtrack. And while it does certainly work well for the game, unfortunately it has the same problem that pretty much every other World War II shooter has, in that the soundtrack ends up basically being generic. You eventually just hit a point where pretty much every single World War II shooter soundtrack just bleeds together and sounds pretty much exactly the same as the others, and this one is no exception in that regard. But once you get past those, there is of course the voice acting, which is actually very well done in this thing. The game doesn't really focus on the individual characters, but they still have enough personality through their voice acting that they actually become pretty distinct, and it actually does give the game quite a bit of character. On top of that, you're hearing quite a lot of battle chatter, and while it isn't quite as great as the battle chatter got later on in the series, they still did a very good job with it, and it's something that most other shooters didn't do at the time. In fact, this was around the time where you had that big transition going on between old school shooters and what we know as modern military shooters. It wasn't quite there yet, it wouldn't be there until we had Call of Duty 4, of course, but you can definitely see where they were starting to transition more toward that more modern style, and in this particular game it actually ends up working pretty well, at least in the presentation department. But it's not all about presentation. What really matter here are the story and the gameplay, although the story in this is really just summed up as it's World War II. You take control of several different characters over the course of both this and the expansion pack. In the base game, the first character you play as is Private Martin, who's part of the U.S. Airborne, and he is dropped into Normandy as part of the advance units to establish a landing zone for Operation Overlord. And from there, you end up going through a series of battles in Normandy all the way up to the Battle of the Bulge. And what you find in this particular campaign is that it really emulates the feel of Band of Brothers. If you've read the book or watched the show in particular, then you know that it's not only just a fantastic book and a fantastic show, but it's really focused on camaraderie and the actual soldiers themselves. And while this game isn't very heavy on character development itself, what it does have is a surprising amount of respect for the individual soldier taking part in something much larger than he is. This is where the big tagline of the original Call of Duty comes in. In war, no one fights alone. And the American campaign definitely feels that way and focuses on that idea. While you do get those moments in the game where you get to be a hero, most of the time you're just one of the other guys. You're running around doing your own thing. Sure, you're more deadly than the others, but at the same time, you're just part of a whole. This is something that the British campaign doesn't really do, because you play as Sergeant Evans, who ends up being part of the SAS. This means that the British campaign tends to focus on small, precise operations that are nonetheless incredibly important for the war effort, but that deal with mostly just a small squad of soldiers rather than a large battalion like in, say, the American or Soviet campaigns. And frankly, these are the weakest parts of the game, because they tend to be very linear levels. There's a whole lot of very cramped environments, and it's generally just fairly standard World War II shooter fare in that regard. In fact, if you put the British campaign's events side by side with the events of, say, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, you'd barely be able to tell a difference between the two. They're very, very similar in that feel. The major difference is that the British campaign still has a great deal of respect for the individual soldier. You're not being this super badass because you are the elite. You're being a super badass because it's your dang job. But then there's the Soviet campaign, and this one really steals the show. In this, you play as Corporal Alexei Voronin, who ends up having to go across the Volga River and into German machine gun fire. Now, you may think that this means it's a great opportunity for you to be a total badass. It's not. In fact, this is the part of the game where you get to have an extended period of being completely and utterly helpless. Once you cross the Volga River, you're put into a line where they hand one man a rifle and then they hand the next man a rifle clip. You're not the one who gets the rifle. So you get to run into a hail of machine gun fire and artillery barrages with nothing more than 5 rounds of ammo for a Mosin Nagant, which you don't get. And as you try to storm into Stalingrad, you are seeing dozens, if not hundreds, of your fellow Russians getting just completely slaughtered. And that's where the Soviet campaign really shines. It focuses more on the hell of war, the fact that you're just one soldier in something that is so much more massive than you that it threatens to just completely devour you. And it manages to do a fantastic job of showing you the hell of the war. Something that you will remark about very quickly in every single one of these campaigns is that it has tremendous amounts of respect for the common soldier and not for simply you being player one. Whereas a game like Medal of Honor will focus entirely on making you feel like a badass and recreating these huge movie scenes, Call of Duty focuses way more on making you feel like you're more of a common soldier than anything else, and it is something that is, frankly, kind of astounding. Video games tend to be very glorifying to the player. They go, oh hey, player one, you're awesome, let's make you feel awesome. And Call of Duty doesn't really do that. It goes, hey, let's look at the reality of the war and let's look at Hollywood's presentation of the war, bring them both together in something that makes it an incredibly compelling experience. And it does a fantastic job of that. And the expansion pack takes what the original Call of Duty did and basically just expands upon it. In the American campaign, you play as Corporal Riley and you go through the Bastogne campaign. In the British campaign, you start off as a Royal Air Force gunner who ends up getting shot down and eventually ends up taking part in Special Forces operations with the SAS. And then when you go to the Russian campaign, you're playing as Private Petrenko and you are actually taking part in the Battle of Kursk and eventually going through the Battle of Kharkov, which means that you get to take part in a fair degree of tank battles in United Offensive compared to the original Call of Duty, where you basically got to play through one. And tonally, they're all pretty much just extensions of what we saw in the original Call of Duty, with the exception of the Soviet campaign, where instead of focusing on what the original Call of Duty's campaign did, where the Russian campaign was focused more on the hell of the war and the fact that you were just one soldier in this absolutely massive conflict, and the conflict basically was devouring you. In the United Offensive Russian campaign, it's really closer to the American campaign. It doesn't focus quite as much on the individual soldiers, but it does focus on feeling like you're part of a larger whole. And while both the base game and the expansion pack have their ups and downs with regards to the campaigns, for example, the tank sequence in the original Call of Duty being pretty clunky and rather unpleasant to play through, and the tank sequences in United Offensive being, well, slightly better, but unfortunately dragging on longer. Generally speaking, they are pretty fantastic single-player FPS campaigns. In fact, the major criticism of the original Call of Duty when it was released was simply that it was too short. While I'd argue that the game is just exactly as long as it needs to be. The thing is that if you think that the base game is too short, then you can just hop into United Offensive, and you can have more of the same, basically, but with slightly improved gameplay mechanics. That's why I really feel like you have to play through Call of Duty and United Offensive together rather than just spacing them out, or getting Call of Duty and then later on down the line getting United Offensive. Because you get that absolutely fantastic campaign experience of both the original game and, of course, United Offensive, but you also get the gameplay improvements that were very noticeable between the original Call of Duty and United Offensive. Things like adding a sprint button, or the improved weapon variety, or the various multiplayer improvements, but I'll get to that more later on. Those things really do flesh out the overall Call of Duty 1 experience, which is why you really do have to play them both together. And even if you do play them back to back, you're going to find that there's actually enough variety in these campaigns that you're really never going to feel like you're doing one thing for too particularly long. There are turret sequences, there are vehicle sequences, and they do try to spice things up pretty regularly during the campaigns, and they space them out in such a way that the pacing ends up being rock solid throughout both the original game and the expansion pack. But once you get past the actual campaign structure, you find that the core gameplay is incredibly satisfying. This was one of the first games to really nail the feel of iron sights, and pretty much everything you use except for scoped weapons is capable of using iron sights. While you may be bothered by that today, back in 2003 that was actually pretty impressive, and it really did feel like a massive enhancement to realism. So while you may be fairly tired of iron sights in just about every shooter today, you gotta realize that on the original Call of Duty, it actually works extremely well, and it was pretty fresh and exciting for the time. And unlike modern Call of Duties, this didn't have regenerating health. You had to find health packs scattered throughout the levels, so you needed to be very careful to not get hit, otherwise you might actually not be able to find a health pack in time. And you really do need to be careful because this game can actually be very, very difficult at times, particularly if you crank up the difficulty. The veteran difficulty in modern Call of Duties has pretty much nothing on the original. The original on veteran is ridiculously difficult. In fact, it's pretty much unfair. Now what you're seeing in this video is what I normally play this game on, which is the hardened difficulty. It's the second highest, and it definitely provides one hell of a challenge, particularly on certain levels where it's incredibly easy for you to get completely and utterly annihilated. This means that on higher difficulties especially, you're going to pretty much take your time and make sure you're peeking around corners using the lean function rather than simply running in guns blazing like you would in pretty much any modern Call of Duty. So even though the action can be pretty intense, you always feel like you can make it through as long as you take your time, you're patient with it, and you work on precision and not exposing yourself rather than trying to run in guns blazing like an action movie hero. This does also mean that once you get past the single player and get into the multiplayer, the gameplay style is pretty radically different from what you're used to in modern Call of Duty games. In fact, if anything, the multiplayer in this is actually pretty quaint. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but it looks like pretty much any other shooter of the time. You of course had your basic team deathmatch, free-for-all kind of stuff, but when you get to United Offensive in particular, they introduced vehicles as well as had modes like Domination, Capture the Flag, and Base Assault, where Base Assault is really the only one that's actually unique out of them, where each team has to use tanks or artillery strikes or anything like that in order to destroy enemy bunkers. It's actually a pretty cool mode, and I'm kind of surprised they didn't put it into any of the other Call of Duty games after it. But that said, the vehicles don't really add all that much to the multiplayer, and if anything, they actually kind of detract from it, because now everybody's going to want to run around with Panzerschrecks or bazookas to be able to take out the tanks, and thus limit their actual capabilities on the ground. Whereas you didn't really have to worry about that in the base Call of Duty's multiplayer. It was just soldier against soldier, and you selected whatever weapon you wanted to use, whether that be a rifle or a submachine gun or an MP44 or something like that, and you just hopped into your dedicated server, because this ran with dedicated servers and a server browser, which still actually work, I might add. You can still find games online, and there are still people playing this online, which is of course a testament to how fun it can be. But anyway, the point is that you would hop into a game, you'd select your weapon, and then you just hop right into the game and do whatever the game mode demanded of you, whether that just be a simple deathmatch or team deathmatch or search and destroy kind of thing. And it's on generally pretty well designed maps, where the maps themselves have plenty of spots for sniping as well as spots for sneaking around behind them. There's generally a pretty solid flow to the maps, and it ends up being a pretty fun game overall, even if it is pretty simple by modern multiplayer standards. They spiced up those basic mechanics a bit when you get to United Offensive with the addition of a ranking system. But it's not like the ranking systems that we're used to in pretty much every modern shooter ever. It's a ranking system where it only lasts for the duration of that particular match. And when you hop into the server, the better you do, the higher your rank becomes, the more perks it unlocks. So things like getting more ammo on your spawn, or getting access to binoculars so you can call in artillery strikes. They're different perks that definitely give you some advantages, but they're not really enough to break the balance of the game, which is really nice. If you're good at the game, you're good at the game, period. It's not like modern games where they tend to lock the best gear behind a rank wall. In this, everybody has an even playing field in terms of what equipment they can use. It's just that the ranks give you things on top of that, and once that map is done and it moves to the next map, guess what? That rank is reset. So you can have completely different people at the higher ranks in the next round. It's very reminiscent of something like Wolfenstein Enemy Territory. If you've played that, then you know what I'm talking about. But you would rank up in that, and it would be dependent entirely on that specific match. And once the next match came along, your rank is reset and you have to work your way up again. Unlike in Enemy Territory, however, there are no real classes. It's just you select whatever weapon you want to use, and then you hop into the game and your rank just continues to go up if you do well. And that, along with the additional game modes, the addition of tanks, the improved weapon variety, make United Offensive the definitive Call of Duty 1 multiplayer experience. And while the player count is pretty small these days, you still can get into games in it, and it is still very fun to play. And I think that highlights the biggest positive of the original Call of Duty. It has stood the test of time. This game is over a decade old at this point, and yet it is still a fantastic World War II shooter. And in fact, the only other World War II shooter that even came close to Call of Duty 1 is actually Call of Duty 2. And even though Call of Duty 2 is definitely a very good game, it's just not Call of Duty 1. Call of Duty 1 is a masterpiece. In fact, it's the only World War II shooter I say is a must-play, because it encapsulates everything that was ever good about a World War II shooter, and throws in a very healthy respect for the history and the soldiers who actually fought in the war. And because of that, it still holds up as a masterpiece to this day. I give Call of Duty and United Offensive a 5 out of 5. Like I said, they're masterpieces. If you're
Какво направи той?
Така, сега една игра не стана, така че сега пускаме тази игра и да видим дали ще стане нещо в нея. И пускам бенчмарка на играта. Приятно гледане на бенчмарка, докато играта се тегли и аз инсталирам след това.
What's up gamers, Dreamcast Guy here, and I just got done spending 12 hours with the Call of Duty World War II beta, and I wanted to give you my early impressions on it. This series has really been going downhill over the last few years, which is funny when you think about how this is now considered both the highest selling and most hated thing on the market. It seems like Activision knows that they have to save the franchise before everyone just quits buying the next 35 sequels, so World War II is very much a resetting of the games. Many new features are being added in, but really what actually makes me most happy when I hop online is what they removed. Since this takes place in the 40s, that means, of course, that we won't have all the crazy jump jets and laser robots that were crammed into previous Call of Duties. Because of that, the maps in this multiplayer beta are smaller and much flatter. Rarely are there spots to climb up, and when you can, they're essentially just small ledges for sniping down hallways. You also can't do those power slides anymore, where you basically just slid across the ground like the entire world was made of melting ice cream. This really leaves players with the main choice of constantly rushing into fights with guns blazing, and here's where I noticed another huge change to the gameplay. It doesn't seem like we have even the slightest auto-aim anymore. You might not have been paying attention, but for the last couple of CODs, they had this subtle function where as you scrolled over a target, your reticle would stick to them for an extra second. This made it where if you saw someone first, you could aim and shoot incredibly fast, and nearly all your bullets would hit them easily. That is no longer the case, so you're going to have to manually hold them in your sights, and if you're using a weapon that isn't super accurate, that can make these moments all the more challenging. If there's one lesson this early tease of the game has taught us, is that this is an older, tougher version of shooters that we haven't seen in a while. Something for diehard fans to eat up, and yet something that casual people who made this franchise popular will probably hate. Out here in the field, being the best requires loads of skill or a willingness to where this game really shines brightest is just in the simple shootouts you'll have hundreds of times a match. The weapons finally have a real weight and force to them again, which is amazing to see return. All the lame entries in this series with mechs and space rifles made the guns feel like toys. Even when I was mowing down my enemies and winning top slot, I didn't have that pride of success, since it was basically just like playing laser tag. There was no limit to points I was earning, but now there is. Being a single soldier with a gritty, beat-up gun crouching in a burned-out house is what Call of Duty was built upon. It's great having the sensation that my expertise matters again, especially in the new game type simply called War. This is a multi-stage invasion scenario where teams compete to capture objectives and move forward across the map. In this beta, we only had one area to try this, but it was a perfect place to show off how this creates some unique competition. You're either thrown onto offense or defense with the main mission of having a tank move into town. Doing that requires clearing out checkpoints, dismantling their armory, and constructing a bridge for it to drive on. It's here that you really begin to learn the importance and talents of each of the classes. Instead of having your typical custom loadouts, WW2 breaks things down into roles a soldier would fill. Stuff like infantry, long range, and heavy attackers are all listed, but these are really just suggestions. If you want, you can give a sniper whatever random weapon you choose, and yet I still advise you at least stick close to their intended job so you're ready for the widest variety of situations. When you get deadlocked on a tiny map and don't have a character with frag grenades to blow foes in their well-guarded spot, you are going to despise that you made all your loadouts the same. Customization. Upgrading your gear is still allowed by using the battle to level up particular guns, but it seems like there's far less options because this is a different time period. When you think about it, this does make sense because really, there isn't heart rate monitors to see through walls like you could in COD Ghosts, and laser dot sights haven't been invented What we get instead
Ia
is
mi
very
prati linka.
practical upgrades, like a grip for more accuracy or just a new barrel for longer range distance. All of this is interesting and surprisingly realistic, which is what we asked for, but there are some problems with this project as well. The most annoying issue I ran into is the fact that kill streaks are way too hard to get. This isn't me complaining that I'm not good enough, but when it takes 8 kills in a row just to drop a bomb, the only people getting that are campers. Every death restarts your kill count, obviously, so you end up having entire matches sometimes where everyone is tucked into corners like this is a hardcore game of hide and seek. During this beta, there are also some major server flaws that made it where a player could often skip back and forth on the screen, which led to many occasions of me firing off shots that only hit air because a second ago it was an enemy. Pair this with the clear trouble that the game is having with hit detection, and you have a glaring flaw. Pulling the trigger and watching your bullets perfectly land into some Nazi's brains really sucks when that piece of trash keeps walking since it didn't recognize the damage. I'm sure most of this is just because it's an early test version of the game and the servers are being hammered by millions of players, but this is stuff that needs to be improved before launch because these problems are pretty dang big. They are doing several more betas before release, so I'm actually eager to play in those as well to personally see what gets rebalanced, patched, or completely fixed from here. Overall, I had a blast recording all my merciless mayhem in Call of Duty World War II, but I'm curious what you think about it. Did you get into the beta, and if so, what is your favorite thing and most hated aspect of done?
Пускам бенчмарка să ne govori.
What's up gamers, Dreamcast Guy here, and I just got done spending 12 hours with the Call of Duty World War II beta, and I wanted to give you my early impressions on it. This series has really been going downhill over the last few years, which is funny when you think about how this is now considered both the highest selling and most hated thing on the market. It seems like Activision knows that they have to save the franchise before everyone just quits buying the next 35 sequels, so World War II is very much a resetting of the games. Many new features are being added in, but really what actually makes me most happy when I hop online is what they removed. Since this takes place in the 40s, that means, of course, that we won't have all the crazy jump jets and laser robots that were crammed into previous Call of Duties. Because of that, the maps in this multiplayer beta are smaller and much flatter. Rarely are there spots to climb up, and when you can, they're essentially just small ledges for sniping down hallways. You also can't do those power slides anymore, where you basically just slid across the ground like the entire world was made of melting ice cream. This really leaves players with the main choice of constantly rushing into fights with guns blazing, and here's where I noticed another huge change to the gameplay. It doesn't seem like we have even the slightest auto-aim anymore. You might not have been paying attention, but for the last couple of CODs, they had this subtle function where as you scrolled over a target, your reticle would stick to them for an extra second. This made it where if you saw someone first, you could aim and shoot incredibly fast, and nearly all your bullets would hit them easily. That is no longer the case, so you're going to have to manually hold them in your sights, and if you're using a weapon that isn't super accurate, that can make these moments all the more challenging. If there's one lesson this early tease of the game has taught us, is that this is an older, tougher version of shooters that we haven't seen in a while. Something for diehard fans to eat up, and yet something the casual people who made this franchise popular will probably hate. Out here in the field, being the best requires loads of skill or a willingness to camp around a corner with a flame shotgun. Where this game really shines brightest is just in the simple shootouts you'll have hundreds of times a match. The weapons finally have a real weight and force to them again, which is amazing to see return. All the lame entries in this series with mechs and space rifles made the guns feel like toys. Even when I was mowing down my enemies and winning top slots, I didn't have that pride of success since it was basically just like playing laser tag. There was no meaning to the points I was earning, but now there is. Being a single soldier with a gritty, beat-up gun crouching in a burned-out house is what Call of Duty was built upon. It's great having the sensation that my expertise matters again, especially in the new game type simply called War. This is a multi-stage invasion scenario where teams compete to capture objectives and move forward across a map. In this beta, we only had one area to try this, but it was a perfect place to show off how this creates some unique competition. You're either thrown onto offense or defense with the main mission of having a tank move into town. Doing that requires clearing out checkpoints, dismantling their armory, and constructing a bridge for it to drive on. It's here that you really begin to learn the importance and talents of each of the classes. Instead of having your typical custom loadouts, WW2 breaks things down into roles the soldier would fill. Stuff like infantry, long range, and heavy attackers are all listed, but these are really just suggestions. If you want, you can give a sniper whatever random weapon you choose, and yet I still advise you at least stick close to their intended job so you're ready for the widest variety of situations. When you get deadlocked on a tiny map and don't have a character with frag grenades to blow foes out of their well-guarded spot, you are going to despise that you made all your loadouts the same. This brings me to another change they've made, and it's with customization. Upgrading your gear is still done by using them in battle to level up particular guns, but it seems like there's far less options because this is a different time period. When you think about it, this does make sense, because really, there isn't heart rate monitors to see through walls like you could in COD Ghosts, and laser dot sights haven't been invented yet. What we get instead is very practical upgrades like a grip for more accuracy or just a new barrel for longer range distance. All of this is interesting and surprisingly realistic, which is what we asked for, but there are some problems with this project as well. The most annoying issue I ran into is the fact that kill streaks are way too hard to get. This isn't me complaining that I'm not good enough, but when it takes 8 kills in a row just to drop a bomb, the only people getting that are campers. Every death restarts your kill count obviously, so you end up having entire matches sometimes where everyone is tucked into corners like this is a hardcore game of hide and seek. During this beta, there are also some major server flaws that made it where a player could often skip back and forth on the screen, which led to many occasions of me firing off shots that only hit air because a second ago it was an enemy. Pair this with the clear trouble that the game is having with hit detection and you have a glaring flaw. Pulling the trigger and watching your bullets perfectly land into some Nazi's brains really sucks when that piece of trash keeps walking since it didn't recognize the damage. I'm sure most of this is just because it's an early test version of the game and the servers are being hammered by millions of players, but this is stuff that needs to be improved before launch because these problems are pretty dang big. They are doing several more betas before release, so I'm actually eager to play in those as well to personally see what gets rebalanced, patched, or completely fixed from here. Overall, I had a blast recording all my merciless mayhem in Call of Duty World War II, but I'm curious what you think about it. Did you get into the beta, and if so, what is your favorite thing and most hated aspect of it in its current form? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. You know, I gotta say that it seems like the silenced machine guns are extremely powerful right now. If you're just starting out and you want an early piece of advice, choose those, mow some people down, cause trust me, they will never see you coming. And it was a total dumpster fire.
Сега вече мога да говорим, Габи, това беше бенчмарка, той свърши. Играта таман... Свърши бенчмарката, играта таман ми се инсталира и тя.
А за какво беше изгасил и не можеш да говоря и ти да говориш?
Бенчмарк, знаеш какво е?
Не.
Представяне на игра.
Браво.
Ето затова ти накарах...
Брат, не пише никакви изисквания, не пише колко изисквания има. Не пише 64 или 30.
А, на мен ми тръгна, аз почвам да играя тая.
Какво викаш?
На мен тая ми тръгна май.
Айде играем Майнкрафт. Не Майнкрафт, а Орояла.
Къде да правя стрим на това Роял, бе?
Ей така.
Колко е дълго, трябва да стримам от телефона, а телефона ми не е за стрим, не може да стрим.
Може да стримам, ама аз нямам програми, нищо. Абе, не моля си теглиш нещо, Nox или нещо. Изтегли си Nox да га?
Майко, стани ми се махнала лентата на телефона.
Каква лента е?
Аре бе, тази игра няма да тръгне. Чакаме да зареди играта.
Става.
Да, тръгна играта. Руската беше.
И така е рояла.
Не, аз си правя стрима на тая игра, съм казал.
Аре, майна.
Сори, казах, че ще правя на тая игра.
Мана, чак.
Аре, бе. Ще имам малко за цепи тук, ама ще се оправите.
Мамай.
Прави. Какво стана? Що заби, бе? Компа ми нещо заби. Какво искаш тази игра от средновековието? Знаеш колко е дърта?
И ти забил компа, па имаш и какво си там...
Ме заби, защото самата игра не тръгва за десятка. Не разбираш, че едва я подкарва. В смисъл, просто е на ръба на отчаяващата